power disintegrates in numerous ways, but few are as disturbing as the downfall of King Philip II of Spain. A man who once ruled over half of the known world faced a final foe that was neither foreign kings nor defiant subjects, but something far more sinister: his own rotting flesh. As we move through the shadowed halls of the Escorial Palace during the summer of 1598, brace yourself for a story where absolute authority clashes with extreme fragility, where the mighty collapse into decaying victims, and where nature delivers a ruthless judgment on the arrogance of rulers. Philip II of Spain was the most dominant monarch of his era, leader of the earliest global empire. His dominion stretched from the Americas all the way to the Philippines, islands that still carry his name. As the offspring of Emperor Charles V, Philip's empire spanned continents so vast that it inspired the famous phrase claiming the sun never sets on his realm. As a staunch protector of Catholic orthodoxy during the Counter-Reformation, he was both admired and dreaded, launching his formidable armada against England and sponsoring brutal crusades against Protestant dissenters throughout Europe. Yet despite all his terrestrial power, Philip's last struggle was not fought on distant front lines, but within the walls of his own chamber. For 52 agonizing days in the blazing Spanish summer, the king who had once commanded great armies and fleets became immobilized, imprisoned by his decaying body. Tiny creatures invisible to the eye ravaged him, turning the invincible ruler into a helpless figure consumed by his mortal vulnerabilities. The smallest details of his condition overwhelmed him completely. This story is not merely about physical torment, although the pain was intense. It is a reflection on the limits of human strength, the inevitability of death, and the unforgiving equality brought by decay. The Escorial Palace that Philip built to serve as both a royal home and a mausoleum would ultimately become his final resting place, but only after acting as the stage for his long and agonizing last chapter. Within these stone chambers, a king who had once controlled the destinies of entire realms found himself utterly helpless against the unyielding assault of illness and parasites. Eyewitnesses to his concluding days left behind descriptions so horrifying that they were dismissed by historians as embellishments for many years, yet contemporary medical study indicates otherwise. What follows is the true account of Philip II's dreadful end, a demise so prolonged, so brutal, and so humiliating that it stands as a solemn reminder throughout history. As we lift the richly decorated royal coverings to expose the decaying body underneath, we are reminded that ultimately, even sovereigns return to dust. Sometimes this happens while they still breathe, sometimes gradually, and sometimes they become living banquets for the tiniest creatures on earth. The initial indications of Philip's decline began in the spring of 1598. At 71 years old, the king was considered old by the standards of that era and had endured numerous health challenges over many decades. Gout, which began troubling him since his 30th year, had deformed his fingers, and Philip's toes had transformed into gnarled limbs, making both writing and walking increasingly challenging as each year passed. The attacks intensified in frequency and severity, spreading from his extremities to his knees, wrists, and shoulders. He also developed a severe form of arthritis that court attendants described as rendering him unable to move a hand or foot, not even to scratch his head. Alongside persistent fevers, these ailments had already confined the king to a wheelchair by the year 1591. Nevertheless, he upheld his legendary diligence, personally examining every important state document, occasionally adding simple notes such as "no," ensuring that not a single word that could influence the fate of thousands across his vast empire was overlooked. However, in June of 1598, Philip's condition deteriorated dramatically. A fresh wave of fevers left him delirious and weakened. More alarming were the numerous abscesses that began to appear on his right knee and hand. These pustules would break open and drain, only to return with even greater intensity. The royal doctors, constrained by the medical understanding of their era, applied poultices and practiced bloodletting, but the infection marched on relentlessly. Within weeks, the King of Spain was confined to his bed, able to move only his head and left arm. The most powerful monarch in Christian Europe found himself completely reliant on servants for every bodily need. His proud Spanish decorum, which had established one of the most formal courts in Europe, collapsed in the face of basic human necessities. The man who had once been Philip could only be approached with great caution. Now lying soiled in his own waste, the attendants struggled to change his bed linen fast enough. As July's heat grew more intense, so did Philip's agony. Abscesses spread widely across his chest, groin, and legs. From these festering wounds arose a foul odor so powerful that even the most loyal staff found it difficult to stay within the royal chamber. The smell of decaying flesh filled the palace halls, prompting courtiers to press scented handkerchiefs to their faces as they passed near the king's rooms. Philip, though still clear enough to grasp the severity of his state, ordered the windows to remain shut, not for his own comfort, but to stop the royal stench from upsetting anyone outside. Contemporary reports described the king's body as covered with pustules that would burst only to fill again with blood and pus. These sores never fully healed. Instead, they became breeding grounds for something far more dreadful. Immobilized and unable to shift position without unbearable pain, Philip's sweat-drenched bedding created a perfect environment for infestation. The first lice appeared in early August. Perhaps they arrived with a palace servant, or perhaps they originated in the now increasingly foul bedding. Regardless of how they came, they found in Philip's festering body an ideal host, warm, moist, and defenseless. The parasites multiplied rapidly, thriving on the king's blood, and the extensive amount of dead tissue from his sores soon led witnesses to report that lice covered the king so densely that his attendants could not keep his body clean, no matter how frequently they tried. Diego Depis, Philip's confessor, later described how the lice appeared to breed directly within the wounds, seeming to emerge from the king's own decaying flesh. Whether this was literally accurate or only seemed so to the horrified onlookers, the outcome was identical. The most powerful ruler in Europe had turned into a living colony of parasites. Some accounts even mention that special attendants were assigned exclusively to remove lice from the royal body, gathering them by the handful, only to discover fresh swarms hours later. However, the lice were only opportunistic feeders. The true nightmare lay deeper inside Philip's deteriorating body. The royal physician, Andrés Zamudio de Alfaro, recorded that the king's wounds began producing foul and corrupt matter, where numerous maggots developed. These larvae, probably from common flies that had entered through the palace windows or doors, found their way into Philip's open sores and started feeding on the rotting flesh. Picture the scene. A man once treated as semi-divine, whose touch was believed by some to cure scrofula, now faced the horror of worms crawling beneath his skin and emerging from his wounds day after day. Servants would clear away the maggots only to find new ones the next morning. Philip remained fully aware, growing more and more dependent on his Catholic faith for solace, supposedly remarked, "Lord, how heavily these offenses against you weigh upon me, yet it brings me some comfort to consider how insignificant they are compared to my transgressions." By the conclusion of August, new terrors surfaced as the relentless pressure on his immobile body caused enormous bed sores, chiefly on his right hip and lower back. These pressure wounds worsened due to his inability to shift position and the constant moisture of his bedding. Eventually, the sores ate through skin, fat, and muscle, revealing bone beneath. According to the royal historian Seedetter, one ulcer on his right hip expanded so much that it allowed a glimpse into the internal cavity of his body. This dreadful injury, described as roughly the size of a fist, developed a grotesque ecosystem of its own. Fray José de Siguenusa, who recorded the king's last moments, noted that from this wound alone, attendants extracted enough material daily to fill 2 silver basins. Even more horrifyingly, this cavernous sore became the main breeding place for maggots, which multiplied faster than they could be removed. Some accounts from that time explain how the larvae burrowed deeper when disturbed, effectively devouring the king from the inside. The flies attracted to Philip's wounds did not limit themselves to laying eggs in dead flesh only. As his health worsened, they began to infest his mouth, nose, and ears too. Unable to brush them away, the once dreaded monarch was left to withstand as insects crept across his face and into his bodily openings. Some historians suggest that Philip might have developed myiasis, a condition where fly larvae infest living tissue in several parts of his body. Adding to his long list of ailments was the king's worsening gout, which made even the smallest touch to his limbs unbearably painful. Yet his body had to be shifted and cleaned whenever attendants tried to change his posture or replace soiled bedding. Philip's anguished cries echoed loudly through the palace corridors. The ruler who once watched heretics burn without emotion now pleaded desperately for mercy from his own servants during this terrible suffering. Philip's mental faculties remained mostly clear, and this awareness was perhaps the cruelest part of his decline. He fully understood his fall from being a sovereign to a helpless sufferer. The king who had commissioned the magnificent Escorial as a symbol of Spanish pride and his own enduring legacy was now decaying within its very walls. Aware of every new indignity inflicted upon his failing body, he endured unimaginable pain but showed extraordinary calm. In matters of faith, he insisted on daily masses in his chambers and often requested readings from religious texts. The man who ardently defended Catholic orthodoxy throughout Europe stayed deeply committed to his beliefs, even as his body became a horrifying spectacle. When he could speak amidst his bouts of agony, Philip discussed matters of state and the future of his vast empire with his son and heir, the future Philip. Despite his torment, his concern for his realm and legacy never wavered, highlighting the resilience of his spirit amid unimaginable suffering. By the beginning of September, new symptoms had intensified the king's agony. Constant diarrhea, possibly resulting from an intestinal infection or as an adverse reaction to his treatments, further drained his strength and worsened the filthy conditions around him. His kidney function started to deteriorate, causing his legs and abdomen to swell significantly due to edema. This accumulation of fluid stretched his already damaged skin beyond its limits, leading to fresh wounds that became additional gateways for infections and infestations. The royal physician Garcia de Ate recorded that the king developed a high fever along with delirium, strongly suggesting that sepsis had developed. During moments of clarity, Philip reportedly kept asking for a specific crucifix, the very one his father Emperor Charles V had held in his final moments. This symbolic link to his imperial heritage appeared to bring the king some solace, even as his physical health collapsed into devastation and decay. The remedies prescribed by the royal doctors likely worsened Philip's condition instead of improving it. Based on humoral theory, the physicians used caustic substances on his wounds, attempting to restore balance to his bodily fluids. These treatments, which included arsenic and mercury compounds, would have burned his already fragile skin and might have hastened tissue death. Frequent bloodletting, sometimes occurring every day, further sapped the monarch's strength during a time when he most desperately needed to endure. Philip's nourishment in these last weeks was mainly limited to broths, diluted with wine and soft bread, when he was able to eat anything at all. The combined impact of infection, parasitic infestations, blood loss caused by medical procedures, and poor nutrition created a devastating situation, leading to the total failure of his body. His heart struggled against mounting systemic collapse and began showing signs of irregular rhythm, with the king experiencing palpitations and moments of breathlessness. Even the weather turned against Philip that summer of 1598, as the heat in central Spain was exceptionally intense. The stone walls of the Escorial trapped the warmth like an oven, speeding up the reproduction of lice and flies that tormented the king, and hastening the decay of his injured flesh. The small windows in his chamber were mostly closed to contain the foul odors, allowing little fresh air to cool his feverish body or clear the putrid atmosphere that hung thickly over the royal bed. By mid-September, it was obvious the end was near. Despite his extreme agony, Philip remained conscious and summoned his children to give his final blessing. His son, the future Philip III, who had been shielded from seeing the worst of his father's decline, was visibly shaken by the frightening figure before him. The young prince is said to have had to exit the room several times to regain his composure, overwhelmed by both the sight and the stench of the father he once knew. A once formidable father was reduced to a writhing, decayed shell. In a last act of royal responsibility, Philip attempted to pass on wisdom to his successor. Witnesses claimed he cautioned his son about the fleeting nature of worldly power, weakly gesturing to his own ravaged body as proof. "I have been treated like an old dog," he reportedly said to the prince. "Remember this when you wear the crown." Whether these words served as a warning against arrogance or a bitter acknowledgement of abandonment by courtiers who could no longer endure his presence remains uncertain. On the 13th of September, 1598, Philip requested the last rites. His confessor administered extreme unction, anointing the few parts of the king's body that could still be touched without causing unbearable pain. Throughout the ceremony, observers noted that flies continued to swarm over the holy oil, drawn by the stench of decay that no incense could conceal. In a grim scene that would have pleased the most devoted Vanitas artist, symbols of divine grace mixed with unmistakable signs of mortal decay. The king's final hours were marked by worsening breathing difficulties as fluid accumulated in his lungs. The last indignity in a series of failing systems. His breaths became shallow and rattling, each exhalation carrying the foul scent of internal rot. At 5 o'clock in the morning on September 13th, after requesting a crucifix be laid upon his chest, Philip II of Spain took his final breath. The ruler who controlled the riches of the New World and commanded Europe's most powerful army had ultimately been defeated by the smallest of enemies. Preparing the royal body for burial brought challenges never seen before. Standard embalming methods were almost impossible to carry out due to the body's advanced decay. According to palace records, the remains were so fragile that they started to fall apart when handled. The royal embalmers acted swiftly, applying large quantities of perfumes, spices, and preserving substances in an effort to make the corpse suitable for public viewing. Despite their dedication, the king's remains kept decaying quickly. As a result, the funeral rites were shortened, with only the most necessary ceremonies performed before the closed coffin was rushed to the royal tomb beneath the Escorial. There, Philip was laid to rest beside his father and his many wives. His physical deterioration was finally concealed from sight, if not from collective memory or history. News of the king's terrible demise spread rapidly across Europe, provoking mixed reactions. In Protestant England and the Netherlands, where Philip was seen as a cruel oppressor, stories of his agonies were met with barely hidden delight. Pamphlets circulated claiming his gruesome death was divine punishment for the tortures of the Inquisition and the bloodshed during the Dutch Rebellion. Queen Elizabeth was of England. Philip's longtime opponent reportedly commented upon learning the details, "We should not ridicule the ailments of rulers because they remind us all of our shared mortality." In Catholic regions, especially within Spain itself, official narratives of Philip's passing were carefully polished, highlighting his devotion and grace while confronting his final ordeal. Historical records avoided the more unsettling aspects, concentrating instead on his acceptance of the sacraments and his worries about the line of succession. The Spanish population was assured that their monarch departed as he had lived, as a symbol of Catholic virtue and regal resolve. Modern medical experts now believe Philip endured a mix of illnesses. His chronic gout likely progressed into a type of rheumatoid arthritis that weakened his immune defenses. This, paired with diabetes indicated by symptoms like overwhelming thirst and swelling, created an ideal environment for several infections to take hold. The precise cause of his boils and abscesses might have been a widespread staphylococcal infection, while his immobility resulted in the formation of stage 4 pressure sores that allowed maggots to infest him. What makes Philip's case especially striking is not solely the severity of his physical torment, but the way it served as a disturbing reversal of his worldly authority. The king who ordered countless men to perish in battle was powerless to command the insects to abandon his body. The monarch whose command could condemn heretics to the flames could not prevent his own flesh from becoming a habitat for disease, as the historian William H. Prescott later observed. Neither immense power nor vast riches could secure exemption from the physical laws that govern all human mortality, he noted. Philip's passing stands as more than a grim historical detail. It serves as a profound reminder that absolute authority does not grant immunity from the inherent frailties of being human. His death embodied the ultimate equality in mortality, revealing that both royalty and ordinary people must endure the indignity of bodily decline. The key distinction lies in the fact that Philip's position guaranteed his suffering would be carefully recorded and remembered through generations. The tragic irony of Philip's fate was keenly felt by those living at the time. For many years, Philip had waged wars to uphold Catholic doctrine and the divine right of monarchs. He portrayed himself as the earthly agent of God, the defender of true faith against heresy. Yet his final moments revealed no sign of heavenly intervention or miraculous preservation of the royal form. Instead, the most devout Catholic king endured a demise resembling punishment rather than grace, abandoned, so it seemed, by the very deity whose cause he had fervently supported. His death marked the start of a gradual and prolonged decline for the Spanish Empire. His son, Philip III, did not share his father's diligence or determination. Philip's administrative expertise declined over several decades. Spain began losing lands and influence, ultimately giving up its role as Europe's leading power. Some scholars propose that witnessing his father's tragic demise deeply affected the younger Philip, causing him to hesitate in fully embracing the responsibilities of kingship. He preferred entrusting authority to his favorites while indulging in personal pleasures. The Escorial Palace, which Philip II imagined as the heart of global dominance and a testament to Spanish grandeur, never functioned again as an effective headquarters for a worldwide empire. Instead, it slowly evolved into what its design subtly foreshadowed: a splendid monument. Today, visitors may explore the royal chambers where Philip endured his excruciating final moments. The accounts emphasize his devoutness rather than the physical decay he experienced. Perhaps the most lasting impact of Philip's dreadful death lies in how it shapes our understanding of history. His passing starkly reminds us that the gap between supreme power and human frailty is narrower than we might imagine. The monarch who governed half the globe realized near the end that he could not control the workings of his own body, a profound lesson for today's leaders as much as for those in the 16th century. Despite his vast conquests and political maneuvering, Philip faced the ultimate limitation posed by mortality. Philip is perhaps most vividly recalled today for the way he departed from this world, not triumphantly on the battlefield, nor peacefully in slumber surrounded by beloved family, but through a prolonged ordeal of decay and suffering. His tale teaches us that history often judges not by how power is exercised, but by how one confronts its unavoidable loss. From the greatest ruler of his era to mere sustenance for worms, not after death, as happens to all, but while still alive, still aware, still sensing every agonizing moment. As we finish this somber journey through the last days of Philip, we might ponder the phrase allegedly discovered among his personal belongings following his passing: "To have been, and not to be, is not to be at all." For a monarch obsessed with legacy and remembrance. There is a cruel irony in being remembered not for the empire he forged, but for the grotesque spectacle of his physical decline. His death outlasts his accomplishments in our shared memory, serving as a powerful reminder that power is fleeting, glory fades away, and ultimately nature treats all equally, kings and commoners returning to dust, sometimes painfully inch by inch.